I never believed in love at first sight before all this happened. At 16 years old, I had never even had a girlfriend, and although I had been infatuated with girls at school, I had never been in love. That all changed when I laid eyes on Clementine Sweeney. It helped that she saved my life that day and was also my first kiss, all in the span of a few minutes. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I should probably start at the beginning. My name is Jordan. I've been a minimum wage employee at Wicked and Wild Water Park since I was 16 years old. I'm 18 now, practically a senior citizen around here. I've spent 2 summers working at the water park, and this was my 3rd. Some people ask when I figured out this place was rotten. I tell them I knew from the day I met Clementine that there was something wrong with this water park. That was when I realized it was named Wicked and Wild for a reason. We're opening up for the summer again, and I'm both excited and dreading it at the same time. Working at a water park is a lot less enjoyable than visiting one, after all. You stand out in the hot sun and just get to watch while other people have fun. They're laughing and tossing around beach balls in the icy blue waters of the wave pool, and you're just roasting in the heat. You probably know the type of place I'm talking about. You likely have one where you live, or something similar to it. And can you picture it? On the sign out front, the K in Wicked is flipped around backwards to give it a fun and friendly sort of vibe. The lettering are tilted playfully, painted in bright rainbow colors. There's cutout cartoons of dolphins and orcas, flanking the brick pathways leading towards the entrance where you can buy an overpriced entry ticket. It's the sort of place where you go to on a hot summer day when you're desperate for ice-cold water, waves, few thrills. The smell of chlorine and tanning lotion permeates the air, and everyone walks around with their towels around their waists or slung over their shoulders, lobster red with fresh sunburns, little orange key fobs dangling from their shorts for lockers they paid exorbitant rates for. There were slides, wave pool with a lazy river, a midway with rides, games, and concession stands, everything you'd expect from a cut-rate, water-themed fun park. But it's far from perfect. Several of the older slides have bumps and divots in them, a result of neglected maintenance over the years, and they'll scrape holes out of your back while you ride down them. This is especially common when the water pressure is poor, which is often. Our wave pool has a history of dirty needles and broken glass bottles being found floating in the murky water, along with other things. Soiled diapers, used band-aids, and tampons, to name a few. Still, I've yet to mention our wealthy owner's obsession with building bigger and bigger slides and more dangerous attractions, all of which he forces us to test for him. There have been other issues as well, problems that have been growing increasingly concerning to me, sinister things that I only learned about after becoming a manager. I'll get to that, I promise. I'm only 18, but since getting promoted, I'm the closest thing to an adult working here most days, and that's beginning to feel more and more obvious. Of course, there's also our owner, an obese, predatory-looking red-haired gentleman who insists on being called Uncle Bob. But he hides out in his office most of the time. When he does venture into the park, he draws all sorts of stares. He has a pale, freckled face, and bright red, frizzy hair which grows sparingly in tufts on the sides of his balding head. Uncle Bob wears a similar outfit every day, despite the high temperatures. Always he's in baggy pants and suspenders, bright pastel shirts and polka dot bow ties. Sometimes he'll add a clashing plaid sports jacket that looks like it's escaped from the 1960s. Most people think he resembles a big, sweaty clown. Although, probably unintentionally. Uncle Bob is the only adult around here most of the time. This is the sort of place where parents drop off their kids and run, since it doesn't cater to them and borders on outright hostility towards grown-ups. When unsuspecting adults do venture in, they never come back after the first visit. The general consensus is, this is our territory, a place for kids and teens. Uncle Bob knows this fact and capitalizes on it. He makes parking so expensive that most people would have to be independently wealthy to afford it. There's no alcohol served in the park, another deterrent to keep adults away. And none of us totally understand why Uncle Bob wants to keep the grown-ups out, but most of us have theorized because of the frequent incidents, as we've come to call them around here. See, we've had mishaps. Somehow Uncle Bob always manages to sort it out, though The wave pool, as I mentioned, is particularly hazardous, not only for those who can't swim, but for everyone. On the day I'm going to tell you about, the day when my world turned upside down, I had to jump into the water to save a kid who went under. This was during my first season on a hot, busy day towards the end of August. When you've been lifeguarding for a little while, you learn to spot the people who can't really swim. The ones who got peer pressured into going out into the deep end or just don't know any better. People who can't swim do this distinctive little sideways hop with each incoming wave. Their eyes wide with fear, and they go deeper and deeper each time, relying on the precious floor beneath their feet to save them. And yet, still, they go in further. By the time their terrified faces go under, it's too late, but we've usually spotted them long before that. On that particular day, I remember it was hot and sunny as well. The humidity was making it even worse, and I was itching to get into the water. That's when I saw this one youngster hopping sideways into the waves. I mean, not treading water, just bouncing on stilted legs into the deep. It was a kid who looked about 12, and he was difficult to keep track of amidst the crowd. The pool was packed shoulder to shoulder that day. I looked across to the lifeguard on the other side of the pool, and he looked back at me. We both saw the same thing. I made a V with my index and middle finger, and pointed with them towards my eyes, then towards the kid, towards my eyes, towards the kid again. Keep your eyes on him, was what that meant. He stared at me blankly, and shrugged. The young kid in the water had long, shaggy, brown, blonde hair, and he was doing the little sidestep jump into the pool, going deeper and deeper with each bounding step forward. He was tittering, looking back and forth between his friends' faces, but it was a nervous laugh, because he couldn't swim. I could tell that already. His friends went in deeper, treading water when the next big wave came, and he followed. He jumped off his tiptoes, and the huge wave rolled in, going up with it. But then it rolled past, and he came back down, his head going under the surface of the water. His friends resurfaced when the wave was past, but he didn't come back up. His pals didn't even notice. They rarely do. I stood up in anticipation of the inevitable and waited, hoping that he would reappear. When he didn't reappear for several long moments, I blew my whistle. A siren began to sound, and I dove from my high perch into the icy waters and began to swim towards the middle of the pool. The kind people made a path for me and allowed me through, while others stared at me with cold eyes as I paddled past them, upset at me for spoiling their fun. The wave machine had been shut off temporarily for the rescue attempt. When I got closer to where he had been seen last, I went under. Opening my eyes under the water, I felt the sting of too much chlorine burning them. It was easy enough to see his vague shape down at the bottom of the pool, thrashing and struggling. I swam quickly down towards him, going as quickly as I could and fighting against my own buoyancy. When I finally reached him, I saw something I didn't understand. The rough white floor of the pool looked like it had been holding him there. Finally, I got close enough to see what looked like quicksand sucking him down at the bottom of the pool. The kid's eyes were wide and terrified, and I couldn't help but feel afraid as well, looking at the unnatural sight. It looked as if the bottom of the pool were drawing him down into it. I heard a loud slurping noise and saw his foot went in deeper, and he was now up to his ankle in it. Tendrils like fingers were wrapping around his lower leg and pulling him down into the permeable surface at the bottom of the pool. I grabbed hold of him under his arms from behind and tried to swim up towards the surface. He was thrashing and trying to get hold of me the whole time, desperate not to die, so it took a while to get him into proper position. Kicking with all my strength, I struggled to free him from the bottom of the pool. It was useless. My breath running out, I looked down at his face, purple with lack of oxygen. His desperation had faded into a groggy look that made me think he had passed out. His arms were limp, his fingers appeared blue in the water. Thinking I had no chance of rescuing him, I did what I always did instinctively when underwater, running out of air and anxious to get to the surface. I kicked off from the bottom of the pool. Stupid. The tenacious surface grabbed onto me like the suckers of an octopus tentacle latching onto its prey. My foot was completely trapped in it, and my panicking mind could not handle this new turn of events. I struggled against it and pulled with all of my might, but it wouldn't relent. With the world beginning to turn different shades of yellow and then red, I felt absolute dread rising up in me, nervous energy that made me feel like I was dying as I watched the kid I had tried to save do just that. His eyes rolled upward, his face bluish purple. That horrible slurping sound came again, and then I felt my foot go in deeper, sinking into the floor of the wave pool. This can't be how I die, I thought to myself. Please, not like this. Pulling harder, straining with every muscle in my body, I tried to yank my foot out of the nightmare goo that was living on the floor of the wave pool. I felt someone grab onto me, heard their muffled screams under the water, and then the world faded into blackness. My dreams usually fade and I don't remember them. But I remember what they were like that day. When I passed out at the bottom of the wave pool, I dreamt that I was back in Uncle Bob's office, getting interviewed for my job all over again. Feeling the same nervousness and anticipation that I had felt, the same uneasiness. It was my first time meeting him, and he was both scary and funny looking at the same time, his red hair poking out of the sides, growing out of his ears, his pale, freckled face smiling at me in a friendly way, asking me questions about my job history, and then frowning at my answers. But then finally, he settled back on smiling again and started to talk about when I would start and how long my training would last. I realized I was getting the position. "You seem like you'll fit right in here, Jordan," he said, standing up and reaching across his desk for me to shake on it. I stood up and reached out to grab his hand, and only then did I notice I was dripping wet, covered in water which was soaking the rug beneath me where I had been sitting. The water dripped from my arm down onto his desk, all over some important-looking papers which were stacked there. Embarrassment rushed through me, and I felt my face burning hot, but I looked up and Uncle Bob was still smiling as if this was of no concern to him at all. "Welcome to the team," he said, grinning broadly. Purple tentacles covered in suckers could be seen sprouting from his sides, rippling through his pastel pink shirt and tearing the fabric. That was when I looked down and I saw my dream hand signing something, a long and ominous-looking contract written in spidery cursive. The pages were stacked high, and my name was printed at the bottom where my half-finished signature now accompanied it. Terrified, I backed away from him, or at least I tried to, but it felt like I was underwater, stuck in slow motion. I couldn't breathe. I realized, panicking. "Finished signing it?" Uncle Bob said. His eyes black as midnight now, purple tentacles whipping around him like a lightning storm. I opened my mouth to speak and water poured into it, down my throat and filled my lungs. Gasping for air, terrified, I grabbed the pen, my hand moving too slowly, and finished signing my name. I woke up after that, and she had her lips on mine, blowing life-saving air into me. I sat bolt upright, coughing water on my lungs, my head instantly aching like someone had hit it with a sledgehammer. She was there looking at me, concern in her eyes, when I finally came to my senses. Her pale, freckled face was rounded, reddened with too much sun, like all of us who had worked there. I had never seen her before. Her fine orange hair whipped around in the wind, making her even more beautiful. "Are you okay?" she asked, looking a little annoyed. I realized it wasn't the first time she had put forth a question. I'd just been too stunned to hear her. My first feeling was embarrassment for some reason, as if it was my fault I had almost drowned and she had saved me. I lowered my gaze, but then realized quickly how foolish that was. I had been trying to save the kid. I suddenly remembered why I had dove into the water in the first place. "He's still down there! We have to save him!" Her eyes went wide, and she put her index finger to her bright red lips quickly to tell me to be quiet, as the crowd gasped in horror around us. "I'm right here," said the kid from nearby. He was almost the same as the kid who I had seen drown at the bottom of the pool. But he looked a little different somehow. His eyes a little meaner, a little less human. "Thanks for saving me." But I didn't. Before I could finish, the whole crowd was cheering like mad. Everyone was clapping for Clementine, and now they were cheering for me as well, since the kid claimed I had rescued him from drowning, even though I had failed miserably at it. "Don't say anything," she whispered in my ear. I felt the hairs stand up on the back of my neck when she did that, and I would have happily agreed to do whatever she said. I nodded. Later on, when the commotion had died down, she slipped me her phone number, At the top, she had written her name and a message in big black capital letters. Trust no one but me. Clementine Sweeney. No girl had ever given me their phone number before. I felt my flesh break out in goosebumps as she handed me the slip of paper. Her fingers brushed lightly against my wrist as she did. She smiled at me, and I saw her blush, and I realized suddenly she liked me too. But how is that possible? She was beautiful, and I was me. I called her that night. The first time she didn't pick up, and my heart began to pound nervously, my lips and mouth suddenly dry. I sat there waiting, debating whether I should call again, but then my cell phone began to ring, causing me to jump. Picking it up in my hands, I stared down at the screen. Clementine Sweeney calling. Sliding up with my thumb on the phone screen, I put it up to my ear. Hello? Hey, she said. It's me, Clementine. Hi, I said, trying to sound casual, feeling awkward and judging every word that came out of my mouth too harshly. How's it going? I'm okay, she said. How are you doing? I don't know, I said honestly. Did you see the same thing I did at the bottom of the pool? I mean, that kid, he was dead, right? Please tell me I'm not crazy. Honey, are you okay up there? I heard my mom shouting from downstairs, and I realized I was speaking too loudly. I'm fine, I'm playing video games, I yelled back, hoping that would somehow explain what she had just overheard. It seemed to, since she left it at that. You need to keep it down about this stuff, said Clementine. You don't understand what you've gotten yourself into. I let her words sink in for a minute before responding, contemplating. I finally spoke. How am I alive? That thing had me. It wasn't letting me go. Her breathing was the only thing I could hear on the other end of the phone. Until she finally told me the truth. My blood went ice cold when she did. It didn't just let you go. Uncle Bob never lets anybody just go. You signed the contract, didn't you? How did you... Because I did it too. It's hard to say no when you're drowning. That's how he gets you. At that point, you'll sign anything he puts in front of you. That was real, she said. All of it. I couldn't say anything. My hands trembling, my knees buckled, I almost fell to the floor. I think you'd better sit down for this. The morning after the wave pool incident, I went back to work at the water park. My nerves were shot after discovering the truth about what had just happened, but I knew I had no choice except to report in for my shift. The consequences of failing to do so had not been revealed to me yet, and I didn't want to find out what they were. My supervisor, Brett, flagged me down before I could find Clementine. She had been in trouble with her parents and wasn't supposed to use the phone. She told me hurriedly the night before in whispered tones that she had to explain the rest at work the following day. All I knew was that both of us had signed a deal with someone or something that we didn't understand. I was dying to know the terms of the agreement, and Clementine said she had some of those answers, but certainly not all of them. Hey, Jordan, how's it going, pal? Brett's wide, toothy grin was hard not to return. Just instinct, really. I found myself smiling the minute I walked into the park, even against my wishes. Gonna need you to head over to the boss's construction project over yonder, he said, gesturing to the towering colossus that was supposed to be a water slide at some point in the future. Although the idea of that terrified and astonished me. I said, no problem, and began walking in that direction. The behemoth structure of rickety steel columns and wooden planks supported a series of haphazard turning tunnels ascending upwards into the heavens. There was a roofed structure at the peak where I could make out the vague shape of someone standing. I was immediately concerned for their safety, as it looked like the thing could collapse at any second. It seemed to sway and bend in the wind. Uncle Bob had nicknamed this project the Beast, and it had been in various stages of construction for years, long before my arrival at the park. The slide was a behemoth, It was towering and steep, with sharp curves, big drops, and a chute at the end that shot you out into the air for much further than should have been legally allowed. In fact, I'm pretty sure any inspector would have shut this place down if he knew Uncle Bob was testing the thing, but of course, he was. Uncle Bob was standing at the very top. I saw as I approached he was holding a garden hose pouring water down the slide. As I got closer, I saw that he had a kid up there with him. Not only that, but a bunch of watermelons for some reason. I quickly figured out what the reason was. He sent a few test watermelons down and he heard the echoing rinds crashing against the plastic tunnel slides as they neared the bottom. There they shot out, zipping over the water of the swimming pool below at extremely high speeds, cracking on the hard pavement far past the landing zone. It didn't surprise me when they exploded on the ground in a spray of pink fruity guts and the black seeds, since the landing zone was a narrow inflatable pool that looked like it had been hastily filled with a foot or two of water. It was not even close to being big enough or deep enough to provide any sort of cushion for such an aggressive landing operation. Looking up at the opening where the kid was supposed to shoot out from the bottom of the slide, I was filled with a horrible sense of dread. I wanted to scream out to tell the boy to stop, to save himself while he still could. I realized who it was immediately. The kid I tried to save in the wave pool the day before. His name was Jimmy, I had found out the day prior. He had apparently taken a job at the water park. What a total surprise. Uncle Bob had trapped another one. The big clown-haired boss man sent Jimmy down into the labyrinthian-looking maze of tunnel slides, and I waited for him to come flying out of the open end of the bottom. Several of us milled about and muttered about how we hoped he wouldn't wind up cracking his head on the pavement, spilling his brains out of his skull like the pink fruit inside the watermelon. None of us mentioned it, but we knew we'd be the ones cleaning it up. Strange thing was, he never came out of the tunnel slide at all. We waited around looking at the dark opening, and eventually Uncle Bob came down the stairs and gawked at it with us. When it became obvious that regardless of how much longer we stood there, Jimmy was not forthcoming from the tunnel slide, Uncle Bob randomly picked one of us to go in and look for him. Smiling at me, cryptically, he pointed at me and told me to start moving. He had some sort of homebrewed spray in his pocket that he, without asking, applied to my knees to give them more friction, so I could get up the slide without so much trouble. Uncle Bob gave me a flashlight, and a big kid lifted me up on his broad shoulders and sent me climbing upwards from the bottom. The dark interior of it quickly dried on the hot day, and the sticky plastic was easy to climb in my shorts. The spray-covered flesh of my knees rubbed abrasively and painfully with each movement. Pretty soon they felt raw and achy, and I guessed they would be bruised black and blue in the morning. I knew I could only get so far. There was a steep incline up ahead where riders traveling from the top would gain speed before the bottom, and it would be impossible for me to climb up that section. I had tried to tell Uncle Bob this fact, but he had insisted that I try anyway. It was hot in the tunnel without any water to cool it down. In the darkness, the echoing sounds of someone breathing heavily from far up ahead caught my ear. "Jimmy, is that you?" But then I realized it didn't sound like a kid breathing. It sounded like someone much bigger. Most of the tunnel up to that point had been dark, but now it was getting to be completely pitch black as I moved further into a section that had been covered with a wooden structure from the outside. It was meant to scare riders even further, I guessed, since they would have to just come from the last big drop at that point in the attraction, to next be plunged into darkness. But the wooden structure looked much bigger than it needed to be. My dim, crappy flashlight was now flickering and going out. The beam from it had been practically useless anyway. Clearly, the batteries had been nearly dead. I decided to keep going, since I was almost there by the sounds of it. Moving into the blackened space, I felt the hair stand up on the back of my neck. I could hear breathing much closer now in the pitch-black sections of the tunnel slide. "Jimmy?" I called out. In the darkness, I felt like the walls were closing in on me, suffocating me as I crawled forward. It was suddenly very hot, sticky and humid in the darkness, making it difficult to breathe. I realized that in the tight space, I couldn't turn around. It had gotten very narrow in the tunnel, which explained why Jimmy had gotten stuck. But why would Uncle Bob design a slide that trapped people? "No. Screw this," I muttered to myself. "It's a setup." I tried to scramble backwards, but it was already too late. "Where are you going?" asked Not Jimmy's voice from ahead. "Don't you want to play with us?" Flickering, the flashlight beam came on for just a moment, just enough for me to see Jimmy's rotting, waterlogged face just in front of me. He was being eaten alive by white maggot-like worms and fat black leeches that had taken large pieces from his cheeks and nose. His eye sockets were black holes, dark and empty, and he was grinning like a madman, teeth missing in places from his mouth. He was surrounded by a structure that was not the tunnel slide. I was disoriented when I saw wet, rigid walls extending past him that looked like the insides of some great creature's guts. Veins could be seen through the translucent mucous membranes, and I realized what I had heard breathing. It wasn't this undead boy just in front of me. It was the beast. The light went out again, and I was plunged into darkness. I tried to back away, but felt sharp, talon-like fingernails dig into the flesh of my forearms when I did. Not Jimmy, raking my arms with his claws and pulled off strips of skin as I desperately tried to pull away. He was quick, and his nails were sharp and long. My gushing bloody wounds began to pour, and that was probably the only thing that saved me. Screaming, I began to slide downwards. My blood was everywhere, creating a sufficient lubricant that allowed me to escape. It spouted from my cuts in my arms and created a slippery, sanguinous river that thankfully brought me sliding down the terrifying twists and steep drops straight out of the opening at the bottom. I went shooting out at high speed into the inflatable swimming pool, which caught me, just barely. A small amount of water cushioning my fall, just enough to prevent my death, and it quickly went Kool-Aid pink with the vast quantities of blood I had lost. Kids dragged me out of the pool, and I remember hearing the sound of someone barfing when they saw what had happened to me. "Where's Jimmy?" one asked. "I think the beast got him," I told him between groans and profanity-laden outbursts of anger and agony. Uncle Bob was already gone, of course, back to his office, wherever that really was. The son of a bitch had failed at trying to kill me at the day prior, so he quickly tried to off me again. It wasn't enough that I had signed his contract, I realized. He wanted to kidnap and clone me like he had with that Jimmy, keeping an undead copy for himself and sending one home to my parents. Essentially, ending up with 2 life-bonded, indentured servants, one of them undead to fulfill who knows what horrible secret tasks for him. I guess that he needed the souls of the real person to create a copy, but that was only a vague assumption based on what I knew so far. The hell was I gonna do? Someone had brought the first aid kit, and I looked up from my bleeding hands and forearms to see it was Clementine. "Hey," I said, trying to act cool. It was difficult because of, well, all the blood loss. "Shut up. Lie down." "What the hell were you thinking going up there?" Her words stung more than I thought possible, and I felt my heart ache for a moment. But then her face softened, and she looked more worried than upset again. I realized her eyes were green. How had I not noticed that? A soft emerald green like nothing I had ever seen before. I always told people when they asked that green was my favorite color. She started to clean my arms with some liquid, saying, "Cold," as she sprayed it from the bottle. Then she began wrapping them with gauze, not minding that my blood was dripping on her bare hands as she worked. I guess they didn't have money for gloves in the first aid budget. Then I realized there probably was no first aid budget. I wondered if she had bought these items herself. "You're good at this," I said, admiring her handiwork. "Thanks. I used to be a nurse before all this." Her face looked truly sad for the first time since I had met her. Everyone else had left, leaving us alone at the bottom of the huge water slide. "I mean, you can still do that, can't you?" She slowly shook her head, applying medical tape to the bandages to keep them secure. We're both in the same spot, you and me. It's not just us either, but a whole bunch of the kids around here have been replaced by Uncle Bob's little doppelgangers. And it's hard to know sometimes which ones. They're completely loyal to him. Same as the undead versions of them. And who knows how many copies he can make if he wants to. He could be building an army of teenage zombies for all we know. So how do we get so lucky to still have free will if the rest are so subservient to him? Why were we spared? "Because I saved your life, dummy." She smiled as she said this. I pulled you up from the bottom of the pool and gave you CPR. Otherwise, you'd be a mindless zombie too. Yeah. Did I say thank you for that yet? Thank you for saving my life. And then kind of doing it again right now. Who knows what kind of nasty infections I would have gotten if you weren't here to clean up these wounds. I think you might be my guardian angel. I would wince at that cheesy line later that night in bed. There's more like us too, you know. Other kids managed to survive Uncle Bob's attacks, but ended up signing the contract same as us. Like I said, when you are drowning or dying, that's how he gets you. He invades your mind somehow, and at your weakest moment, he lies and offers you the one thing he can't even really give you. In fact, by signing, you're... She broke off there, seeming hesitant to continue. What? Nothing. Never mind for now. I'll tell you later. I don't want to overload you too much for the first day of your contract. Your head's probably spinning as it is. It was. But again, that might have been due to the blood loss. I'm good, I lied. Okay, tough guy. Let's go to the break room for a minute. I want you to meet my friends. I stood up on shaky legs, and she put my arm over her shoulder to support me. I smiled, feeling the warmth of her against me. Happy to be back with her again. She was taking me to meet her friends. That was a good sign, right? I couldn't help but feel hopeful, despite how terrible I had felt a few minutes prior. Clementine made everything seem right, even though there was so much going wrong. We walked over to the structure nearby that had been set aside for our breaks, a ramshackle hut which had been constructed by teens at some point in the past, a thing born of necessity, as we all needed a reprieve from the sun. However, the lack of air conditioning, windows, and any real airflow turned it into a sauna. Still, it was shady, and more important, private. The kids called it the box, due to its small size and lack of windows. I also found out later it was some sort of sexual innuendo, since it was where many kids lost their virginities as well. Yeah, I know, guys are pigs and all that, but come on. I didn't come up with it, okay? Don't shoot the messenger. When we got into the box, it was hot, as usual, but not as bad as on some days since it was still morning. 2 kids about our age were in there waiting, looking anxious, whispering in hushed tones about something as we entered, then immediately stopped talking. But then they saw Clementine's face and jumped up smiling. "You made it!" The 2 girls embraced. There was another guy, a year or 2 older than me, who Clementine walked over to next. She hugged him tightly, and I immediately felt a pang of jealousy. It was like an arrow through the heart. Suddenly, I realized I never even asked if she had a boyfriend. Had I misread the whole situation? Damn it. I was not going to be alone forever. All the good ones were taken, I thought to myself. Thinking 5 steps into the future, I was already picturing Clementine kissing him, turning to me and saying, "Oh, by the way, Jordan, this is my boyfriend. Ben, isn't he the best? Jordan? Hey. Earth to Jordan." I realized I was standing there stupidly, zoned out in my own head. They were all looking at me and I was staring off into space. Sorry, it's been a rough couple of days. I'm pretty sure I lost way too much blood. And also any happiness. "Hey, it's okay," said the guy. "I was just saying, my name's Ben. This is Marissa." "Everyone around here calls me Marie," said the girl, sticking out her hand. I shook Marissa's hand and then Ben's, squeezing his too hard for a moment before realizing I was even doing it. He didn't seem to notice. "So, how much has Clem told you about our little situation? She tell you her batshit plan yet?" Clementine's face went red as a strawberry, and she stared daggers back at Marissa. "It's not batshit. It would work if you guys gave it half a chance." I was struggling to catch up, and the world felt like it was spinning and going red around the edges. "I barely know anything. Just that we all signed a contract under duress, and now we're stuck here with some hellish creature that we don't understand." "Oh boy, I think I need to sit down," I said, grabbing onto the table. They helped me into one of the crappy folding chairs, and I plunked myself down. "Maybe this isn't the best time to lay another Uncle Bob bomb on him," said Ben, looking worried. No, I can take it," I said, trying to sound tough. Feeling a bit better after sitting. "Just tell me what the hell I've gotten myself into, please. Maybe I can help figure some way out." Clementine sighed, and they all sat down around the table with me. thing is, we don't know all the details either, but we all have the same experience. Drowning, being forced to sign the contract, and it wasn't just us. There were more of us. Others, until recently. Bob said this, and then looked at Clementine as if asking for permission to say something. She nodded, tears in her eyes. Clem's boyfriend, Tom, had signed the contract too. Managed to survive a couple weeks before Uncle Bob finally caught up with him. Now he's got a doppelganger running around, and Clem said she ran into the undead version of him one day recently. Didn't go well. Clementine was crying next to me, and I put my arm around her, wanting to comfort her. She put her head against my chest and began to wet my shirt with her tears. She was sobbing and shaking as she grabbed onto my t-shirt and wept. He was falling into pieces, and he said, I'm next. It wasn't him anymore, I know that, but it just... I never wanted to see him like that. She looked up at me with reddening eyes, leaking tears. After a few minutes of silence, an idea occurred to me. We can stop him. I know how. The four of us can do it. We just have to take him out. No more Uncle Bob, no more contract, right? Ben looked at me, shaking his head, stunned. Man, you sound just like her. Clementine was staring off into space, tears still streaming from her eyes, but there was a hint of a smile flickering at the corner of her mouth now. At least, until I said what I said next. By the way, guys, I think you should know, the beast that slide Uncle Bob has been working on, there's something really messed up inside of it. I think if he opens that attraction, a lot of people are going to die and get turned into more soldiers in his zombie army. Clementine jumped up and looked around the room at all of us with wide eyes. He told a bunch of us this morning that he's opening it this weekend. That's the whole reason he was running tests today. The beast is opening for business starting this Saturday. That's what he said. We resolved right then and there. We had to do something. The four of us were the only ones standing between Uncle Bob and his horrible, evil plans coming to fruition. Somehow, we had to topple the beast. Have you ever liked someone romantically who didn't like you back? It stings, right? By 6 years old, I was an expert at it. I had plenty of crushes at school, none of whom knew I existed and was too scared to talk to any of them. But Clementine was different. In her, I sensed something which I hadn't felt before. The way she looked at me, the way she snagged every opportunity to touch my hand or my shoulder or my forearm or my hair. All these little signals told me that she liked me too, despite my self-conscious mind's objections. What I sensed in her was a reticence similar to a war widow, afraid to dishonor the memory of her MIA husband, only one who was doomed never to return from battle. It was like she still held hope for her lost boyfriend Tom, the one who Uncle Bob had taken like he had taken so many others. The poor guy was still out there, sure, but he was a mindless zombie now. I mean, couldn't she see that? The selfish part of me wanted her to forget about him, but I knew that was terrible of me. I mean, she needed time. And besides, we had other things to worry about now. Hey, did you hear me? I asked if you're ready. Clementine was waiting expectantly, standing next to me in the darkness. The tall chain-link fence topped with barbed wire stood before us, and beyond that, the water park. Sorry, I kind of got lost in my own head. Yeah, I'm starting to get that. That's okay. I still like you. Clementine's face lit up in a small, freckled smile. Just don't forget I'm here too. Taking her hand, I looked to Ben and Marissa. Everybody set? Ben and Marissa nodded nervously. Not really, said the looks on their faces. All right. Let's do this then. Ben took the thick blanket from his backpack and managed to successfully throw it over the top of the barbed wire fence so that it lay over the peak, protecting us from the sharp spikes up there. Nice job. Okay, make sure we've got everything and let's go. We threw our supplies over the fence and began to climb. The past week had been non-stop planning and preparation, which had led us to this. We had spent all of our savings on the equipment to do what we had to do. Uncle Bob's water slide, the beast, had to be brought down. We had come under cover of darkness to do just that. I had discovered earlier that week that the slide was no ordinary attraction. There was something hidden within it. A massive creature which I had only glimpsed a part of. I had seen the inside of its digestive system while climbing up from the bottom of the slide to rescue a kid who was supposedly trapped inside, but of course, it turned out that it had been a trap set for me the whole time. That's the last time I ever listened to Uncle Bob, I told myself. But then I remembered the contract I'd signed. The one I thought was a dream, a nightmare, but in fact, was reality. I signed my life away. That was what I had begun to realize. Maybe more than just that, perhaps my soul as well. My afterlife could end up being just as cursed as my regular one. The thought of working in this godforsaken water park for the rest of eternity was more than I could handle. And I was beginning to realize that Clementine was right. We needed to kill Uncle Bob. That was the only way. But we had to do this first. If not, who knew how many would die? The four of us climbed over the fence and only sustained minor injuries negotiating the barbed wire at the top, since a thick duvet now separated it from us. We all wore gloves, black clothing, and ski masks as well, which we pulled down over our faces as we entered the park. I wound up with a couple of painful cuts on my thighs, where the barbed wire had found its way through the blanket. Warm blood trickled down my legs, and I wondered how deep the wounds were, and how rusty the barbed wire was. Mentally counting the years since my last tetanus shot. Our destination was easy to spot. It towered over everything, just a black silhouette against the starry night sky. A beast. We assumed Uncle Bob had a few security guards roaming around the grounds, so we stuck to the dark places and walked in the shadows, weary and watchful of any flashlight beams or hiding sentries. The area we had entered near the perimeter was full of vendors and concession stands, so we tucked ourselves tightly against the walls of these buildings and avoided the light, hoping no security guards would see us. Strangely, there was no one. The place was eerily silent. As we crept along, we became bolder, seeing nobody patrol the park. We started to whisper to each other occasionally and began to betray our initial instincts to move stealthily. Finally, we arrived at the tall and imposing water slide. It towered above us, twisted and chaotic looking. Looking up at it, I felt nervous and jittery, my hands trembling and my stomach tied in knots, thinking about what we were about to do. "Are we sure about this, guys?" asked Ben, mirroring my concern. Clementine looked resolved, though, and I followed her lead when she nodded. "As sure as we're ever going to be. We gotta stop him. This is the first step." Ben nodded, and he pulled the tank of fuel out from his backpack. "Well, at least it's mostly wood. If we can get it going, the rest should catch easily enough." I looked up to see where the ignition point for a fire should be, trying to determine which section of the water slide would be most flammable looking. Of course, the one place that caught my eye was the spot where the beast was slumbering, hidden beneath a wooden structure that covered a section of the slide. This is where the riders would be plunged into darkness on the attraction as they descended downwards, only to be swallowed up by the thing which lay inside. Their bodies and souls would belong to Uncle Bob. The slide was scheduled to open the following day now. Up there. Wooden structure near the middle. Then another fire at the base of the stairs, and the whole thing should go up. We had discussed things beforehand, but now that we were here, the holes in our hasty plans were becoming more obvious. Our nerves and adrenaline had taken over, and everything felt slipshod and tentative, like we could be caught in any second. "Marissa and I will take the stairs. You guys head up to the middle of the slide, okay? Be careful." Clementine was the voice of reason, remembering the important details and reminding us to execute our part. Ben and I made our way towards the base of the slide. When we got to the place where it opened up at the bottom, I boosted Ben on my shoulders so he could get up to the ledge holding it up. Then he reached down and helped me up as well. The beast was built up on a hill, so we were able to climb on the dirt slope of the embankment, although it was steep and difficult to traverse. As we climbed up towards the structure at the center of the slide, I looked back down to see Clementine pouring gasoline on the base of the staircase. "We better hurry. There could still be security guards patrolling this place. Clem and Marissa are pretty exposed down there," I said to Ben. The steep slope was tough to negotiate, but eventually we made it to the covered section. The wooden structure was shadowy and dark inside, but I heard the sound of something enormous, breathing noisily from within. It was snoring, I realized. I put my fingers to my lips, indicating for Ben to be silent. His shocked face told me he had already heard the sound of something enormous breathing, though, and he had no desire to wake that thing up. As quickly and quietly as we could, we began to pour the gasoline, and once the structure was soaked in it, I heard the sounds of disturbed sleep from within, sniffing sounds and movement like it was waking up. Terrified, I started to move away from it, pulling Ben with me. Moving away from the structure, we dropped the burning Zippo and watched as it went up quickly in flames. The fire spread, and as we descended the hillside to escape, we heard the shrieking, high-pitched cries of something large and evil dying within the tunnel slide. It howled in pain and fury, and the entire structure shook and began to crack in places as the monster inside bucked and thrashed, burning, attempting desperately to escape. But it was too late. The inferno was swelling up into the sky now, and the wooden structure was roaring with a massive gasoline-fueled fire. Looking down at the bottom of the staircase, I saw Clementine had accomplished her objective as well. The wooden stair structure was engulfed in flames, but I couldn't see Clem. At least, not at first. Once we got to the bottom of the hill and jumped down on the solid ground again, I saw her. Actually, I heard her first. She was screaming. Her high-pitched cries for help were intermittently muffled as if someone was covering her mouth while she was violently resisting them. Ben and I ran from the bottom of the slide over towards the stairs where we had seen her last. They were about 100 yards away from where we were, and once we got there, it was already too late. Marissa had escaped, but Clem wasn't so lucky. Looking up at the glowing inferno, I saw Clementine being carried up the stairs by several of Uncle Bob's undead servants. They looked like teenagers about my age, but their eyes glowed red in the night. Their flesh was melting and singed black from the fire as they climbed the burning steps, but they paid no mind. Clem was burned as well, her ski mask and black clothing smoking, on fire in places, as they carried her up the stairs away from me towards the top. Up high at the top of the burning slide where the roof structure stood, I saw Uncle Bob. His face could be glimpsed grinning in the glowing fire. Ben was holding me back as I screamed and cried out, begging him to let me go, trying desperately to run up the stairs and chase after them. The flames were hot as hell, and I eventually relented. The heat of the inferno on my face bringing me back to my senses, forcing me to retreat from the base of the stairs. Clementine was at the top of the stairs now, appearing to have passed out, unconscious from the smoke. I saw the zombie children were blank-faced and impassed as they showed her to Uncle Bob. He pointed at the entry point of the slide, and they threw her down into the opening at the top. I imagined her sliding down the tunnel in the liquid heat of melted plastic and her own burning flesh. No, my mind couldn't take any more of that, and shut it away, hoping somehow it wasn't true, that this was a trick. No! I screamed. But it was too late. It was already too late. My knees buckled, and I fell down to the ground, unable to comprehend what had just happened. At that moment, I was sure that Clementine was gone forever, but, of course, around here, dead doesn't always mean gone. Even though, often that would be a relief. The flames were licking up the wooden structure now, almost completely consuming it, but the owner of the water park did not seem to care. Uncle Bob seemed to bask in the fire, embracing its intense heat, his hands stretched out wide like a pastor during a prayer service at the evil evangelical church. A dark prophet, a fire demon, a bad omen for everything. As it consumed everything around him, he stood taller and looked as if he grew larger in the flames. Part of me wondered if it was the fire he was feeding on, or our pain and suffering, and maybe it was both. "You'll need to do more than that to stop me, children!" His voice boomed like thunder from the top of the monstrous water slide. The sound of the beast dying inside had ceased. And now there was only the sound of his voice and the crackle of flames burning all around us. In the distance, I could hear the wails of a fire truck's engine and perhaps a police car coming with it. "We need to go," said Ben, pulling my arm. "We can't save her, man. We gotta leave her. I'm sorry." Marissa was gone too, but we met her outside the park during our escape. She hadn't gone away after seeing what happened to Clem. Unable to stop it, the three of us ran from there and we got away without incident. Our small-town police force never did figure out who started the fire. We were all devastated after that night. I thought for sure we had lost Clementine, but then 3 nights later, I heard something rap against my window, like a pine cone or a small pebble. A few seconds after that, it happened again. I opened the window and I looked down below to see a familiar face. At least, half familiar. It was Clementine. She looked up at me and her green eyes met mine, sad but hopeful. I heard myself gasp and seemed to look like the world was spinning in circles around me. I backed up, unable to control my shaking legs. They propelled me away from the window, away from my would-be girlfriend who stood outside, despite the fact that she was dead. When I looked back outside again, she was gone. My voice caught as I called after her, trying to bring her back. Clementine was alive. But she did not look like how I remembered her. Her face was split down the center like a black and white cookie, like Two-Face from Batman, like Hel from Norse mythology. On one side was the freckle-faced girl I had fallen in love with. On the other was a burnt and melted visage, purple and black, with mangled and warped scar tissue, muscle and bone could be glimpsed beneath, shining bits of skull protruding, but she was alive. And I got the impression it really was her. Uncle Bob's Wicked and Wild Water Park is open for the season. God help us all. The smell of sunscreen and chlorine fills the air yet again, and as I walk around the park doing my managerial duties, I'm reminded constantly of how much I'm missing out on my youth, my summers, and plenty more than that. Gone to this hellhole. All around me are people my own age, laughing, flirting, having fun in the sun, while I take laps around the park in my sticky with sweat polyester uniform, attempting to keep the employees somewhat in line, basically ensuring they show up for work and aren't blatantly drunk or high. When I started this saga, I told you all these things happened to me a couple years ago, when I was 16. I'm 18 now, and things have only gotten worse since then. Since we set fire to the beast, since Clementine was captured by Uncle Bob, and everything turned sour. Thanks to circumstances far beyond our control, Uncle Bob was forced to take last year off from his recruitment activities. The water park was shuttered over that time, and is only now reopening for the first time in 2 years. The lost summer, as Uncle Bob called it mournfully, was instead spent upgrading the park's features. All these tasks were performed by us, of course, his living and undead teenage servants. At least you still have a job, my mom told me reproachfully over dinner one night last summer when I was looking glum. She had been laid off a short while before that and told me that I should be happy. I was still living there rent-free, considering how much money I was making working at the water park. I couldn't even tell her the truth that I no longer received a paycheck for my indentured servitude. Things were tense for a bit, but she's since gotten a new job and things were looking better. Anyways, summer's back again and the park is opened up for the year. Our nefarious owner is up to his old tricks again. Several kids have mysteriously disappeared in the wave pool and on other attractions, only to reappear later on, much to the surprise of their anxious friends. Uncle Bob instructs us to delay these kids' friends from calling their parents for as long as possible, while he sorts out each unique catastrophe in his own special way. I find I now have little willpower to resist his instructions these days. It's like his controlling influence is a sickness, and any immunity I once had has dwindled away over the past few years, the longer I've been here working for him. These days, Clementine is my only glimmer of hope in the world. The only glimpse I get of her are when she leaves notes outside my bedroom window late at night. She always covers her face with a hood, keeping it cloaked in shadow, after that first time when I saw her and looked so stunned and afraid. I whisper to her that she's still beautiful. Leave her notes to show my affection hasn't dwindled over the time, but she only remembers my initial shock and horrified reaction at seeing her half-mutilated face. Missing flesh and pieces of muscle in places where shining bone protruded. Her eye sockets, the tendons and muscles opening her jaw when she spoke were all visible, and I couldn't help but shudder to think about it. I'm sorry, Clementine. I know it wasn't your fault. For the past couple of years, I tried desperately to think of a way to get her back to her old self again. But all I can come up with is the idea that if we could somehow get rid of Uncle Bob, then maybe, just maybe, everything will go back to normal again. I know it's a long shot, but Clementine seems to have a plan. When I was leaving work a few weeks ago, I saw someone peeking from the shadows below a sewer grate, lifting it up just enough so I could see their eyes. Who it was, I couldn't tell, but it frightened me badly. Over the next couple of weeks, I saw the same thing again and again, someone watching me, observing me from the shadows. It wasn't Clementine. I knew that much based on their movements and features. Then, late one night, when I was walking home from work, they grabbed me. All I heard was a rustling sound coming from a shrub off to the sidewalk, movement and voices surrounding me. Then I was plunged into darkness as someone shoved a sack over my head, and rough hands laid hold of my arms and picked me up, carrying me away. I tried to scream, terrified, unsure of what was happening or who was doing this to me. The hands which held me roughly were slippery and wet, a smell of rot and decay emanating from the captors. It was difficult to breathe, and the stink as they dragged me back towards the water park, kicking and screaming. Uncle Bob was finally going to turn me, I knew it. My life was over. I had worked as a contracted employee for too long, far longer than anyone else has. For a time, I thought I was special, that he was going to let me live, but it was not to be. At least I'd get to be with Clementine. That was the one thing that kept me from breaking, kept my mind from snapping like a twig. They dragged me downstairs and along musty-smelling corridors, down more stairs, and into what I assume were sewers under the park. It stunk like human waste and still water. Bugs buzzed around my head and landed on my face, some of them biting me despite my muffled screams of protest. Rats and mice could be heard on the floor, but I couldn't see them through the bag which covered my head, soaking the world in darkness. I felt them brushing against my legs, though, and I cringed and grit my teeth, hoping they wouldn't climb up my shoes and ankles as I pictured them doing just that. Their furry, diseased bodies bumped against my skin, and I couldn't stop myself from yelling in panicked fear a couple of times. Finally, it seemed my captors were satisfied. We reached our destination. They pulled the bag off of my head, and I blinked against the bright lights which assaulted me like an interrogation room in a police station. Mutilated faces surrounded me, their grotesque features barely visible in the shadowy room, and the halo of the bright lights which blinded me. Zombie kids in various states of decay huddled close around me on all sides. The stench was extraordinary, like the smell of month-old roadkill mixed with stagnant coppery blood, like a dead raccoon in your attic you find a year after expiration, like an abandoned slaughterhouse or a broken trash compactor full of old meat. "You're here," said a familiar voice. Kind, warm, filled with concern. "We've been waiting," said the same voice, only different. Now cold and passive. Clementine was standing in front of me, her head turned so that the rotting, dead flesh looked at me, worms and maggots feasting and squirming within. Her right eye was puffy and black with necrotic tissue, her face still split down the middle, alive on the left, decaying corpse flesh on the right. "Clementine? What's going on? What is this place?" A cold, hard laugh came from her then, but that was cut off abruptly when her beautiful face turned to look at me again. This time, the living side of it that I knew so well, I had fallen in love with. She smiled and spoke with sincerity and warmth once again, but the words were serious and grave. "This is where we've been hiding. Where we've been planning for our attack against him. Against that son of a bitch who did this to all of us." Her face turned, revealing the corpse flesh once more, and the voice changed back, causing my chest to tighten with fear. I realized this was not the same girl I had fallen in love with at first sight, the one who had saved my life. This was someone else. At least half of her, anyway. A knife gleamed in the dull light, and I realized she was holding a long blade behind her back. "We're gonna kill Uncle Bob, Jordan. Are you with us? Or are you against us?" She gripped the knife more tightly as I hesitated and waited for my response. I only hoped that when I replied, it would be the answer that she wanted to hear. "How do you kill an immortal being?" We had seen Uncle Bob standing in the midst of a burning pyre, laughing like a demigod. He could breathe underwater, blending in like an octopus in a reef. He could move around the park with impunity, seemingly invisible at times. The water park was his habitat, and he was the alpha predator, the top of the food chain, great white shark of the place. How do you kill that? Still, we knew it was the only way, and while I worked my last day shift before the big event, I was forced to consider again how dangerous it all was. Sitting on the shore of the wave pool, I watched as the crowd went up and down in lazy parabolas, sinking and rising with the swells. Many were lounging in bright yellow inner tubes, others dangling from pool walls in the deep end like underage Spider-Men, screaming with joyous abandon as the lifeguards shouted and blew their whistles at them. The sunburned masses of teens were oblivious to the dangers lurking beneath the clear blue water. A couple of summers ago, I nearly drowned right where you're swimming, I wanted to yell. The girl of my dreams saved my life, and now she's a half-dead zombie, and we're planning on killing someone together later tonight. I didn't yell that, of course, but part of me wanted to, for some perverse reason. Just like part of me can't help but picture what it would be like to fall off an overpass and land in the midst of speeding traffic below whenever I walk over the highway bridge on my way to work. Is that weird? Maybe I just have a vivid imagination. I felt like I had to get it all out there. All these secrets and lies and deceits, despite the deadly consequences, just to see what would happen. But that was probably just Uncle Bob's influence, I realized as I came out of the trance, shaking my head. He couldn't read my mind, but he had spies everywhere, and his influence on me was strong and difficult to negotiate. I had to be vigilant. The sun was beating down hard on my neck, and I felt the sweat dripping down my back, swamping my shoulders and armpits in the thick polyester uniform. I decided to go stand in the shade for a few minutes. I went over to a nearby concession stand when there was a small lineup. We were allowed free tap water, no soda, at any of the concession stands, but we didn't get preferred treatment. We had to stand in line just like everyone else. "What's up, buddy?" The guy standing in front of me in line was eyeballing me, and I wanted to ask him what the hell he wanted. I wasn't in the mood for a joking kid who thought that I was his punchline. "You work here?" he said, the snooty grin spreading wider. He lowered his shades and looked me up and down. He had long, wavy blonde hair and was wearing a bright orange bathing suit, white tank top and flip-flops. "Yeah. What's up with the owner of this place? I hear he's nuts." I wasn't sure what to say. Part of me wanted to recruit the guy for our mission, but that was far too blatant, and for all I knew, he was a spy. I decided to err on the side of caution. I wouldn't know. He seems normal enough to me. The line was moving, but the guy wasn't. I pointed ahead, but he ignored me. I noticed again that he was a half-foot bigger than me and had some rather large muscles. I wondered if we were going to have a problem. My adrenaline began to kick in, and he ignored my attempts to move the line forward and just stared right through me instead. He began to emit a low growl, and his upper lip quivered, revealing sharp incisors. The sun was beating down hot on my neck, and the shade looked so close. He's probably just high on meth or something, I decided. I mean, these things happen. I began to back away, then edged around him nervously, moving gradually towards the concession stand. He turned mechanically, followed me, taking long, deliberate strides, inching closer, still growling low in his throat. I didn't want to turn my back on him. I moved away from him towards the cool shade, thinking I would have to ask the clerk at the concession stand to call for backup to kick the guy out. I looked back quickly and found the line and cleared away with unnatural speed. The area was abandoned. And I was by myself now with the scary-looking guy and the clerk behind the counter. "Hey, call for somebody to come here quickly. This guy's all hopped up on something," I said, without looking at the employee. There was no response. But I had sworn I had seen someone behind the counter a moment before. The long-haired kid moved a step closer, looming large over me now. He was still growling, fists clenched, cords standing out on the sides of his neck. "Did you hear me?" I said, agitated now, afraid to turn around. "This guy looks like he's about to eat my face or something." No answer. The terrifying figure stepped closer, and I spun around, ready to jump into the booth to get away. I froze, surprised to see Uncle Bob, of all people, standing behind the counter. instead of the clerk. He was dressed all in white with the paper hat, the red bow tie, the name tag, and everything. He would have looked ridiculous if not for the fact that it was so horrifying, like seeing an adult dressed in children's clothing waiting for you in a dark alley at night. The hell was he doing working behind the counter of a snow cone stand? It caught me off guard, and I felt for a moment as if my heart stopped beating in my chest before it kicked in again and began to pound rapidly. He smiled and seemed amused by my horror. I had just been thinking about shouting how we were going to kill him, and now he was standing in front of me. His eyes bore into mine as the low growling continued behind me. I felt sure that he would read my mind as he watched me with growing interest. "You're planning on killing me, aren't you? Good luck with that, kid," I heard his mocking voice in my mind, as plainly as if he were speaking to me. I hoped it was just my imagination, but then wondered if that was just wishful thinking. "Hello, Jordan." "Hi, Uncle Bob." His hands were behind his back, and he leaned forward expectantly, asking, "Are you thirsty, Jordan?" I nodded, my mouth dry. I hadn't realized before just how much I needed a drink. I felt like I hadn't had a sip of water for a week, a month, even. I couldn't remember the last time. How had I forgotten to hydrate on such a hot summer day? That's how you have heat stroke. Even a rookie knows that. "Here you go, my boy," he said, handing me an ice-cold, frigid-looking bottle, dripping with perspiration. I licked my lips with a sandpaper tongue and reached out for it desperately. As my fingers touched it, he pulled it back out of my reach, and my knees buckled with desperation. A hoarse groan escaped my lips, and I looked to see him grinning even more broadly than before, relishing every moment of this exchange. "You want it? Then tell me. What is she planning? I know she's planning something. Now, tell me." The hot breath of the guy behind me was on my neck. It made me feel claustrophobic since he was standing so close. I could feel his body heat. "Who?" I asked, playing dumb. "Your little bitch!" "The one you've been seeing behind my back in the sewers, outside your window at night. You think I don't see you? I see everything!" He lifted me up by my shirt collar, and I looked around to see the entire park all around us was abandoned. All noise had ceased. Everyone was gone except the three of us. "I don't know. I don't know," I shouted, resisting his eyes as they bore into mine and attempting, with every fiber of my being, not to let my fear take hold. "Think harder!" He was holding me up by my throat now, and the world began to turn shades of yellow and then red and then finally black before I managed to squeak out a word. A word I'll regret saying. But it's done now. That one word seemed to be enough for him. I fell to the concrete and skinned my elbow badly, and when I looked up, he was gone. As was the guy with the long hair. Screams were coming from somewhere nearby, and I realized it was me. There were suddenly customers in line again, and a normal kid was behind the counter, serving them colorful fruit-flavored snow cones. I felt like I had fallen into an alternative reality for a moment. Come back again, just like that day but beneath the wave pool. "You okay, dude? You don't look so hot." There were people reaching down to help me up, and their concerned faces told me everything I needed to know. They thought I was having a breakdown of some sort. To their eyes, I had been standing there 1 second, and then I was on the ground screaming a moment later. "Water," I croaked. My mouth and throat were parched as if I hadn't been drinking anything in days, and maybe I hadn't. Was Uncle Bob messing with my mind to get information out of me, or just to punish me? Probably both. "They get this guy some water!" People rushed around, and a few moments later, I had a tall glass of water in front of me, which I proceeded to take long, greedy sips from until I started to gag. "Dude, you really need to stay hydrated better. It's summer. What are you, a rookie?" I finished my shift and left the park feeling guilty. Why did I feel guilty? I couldn't remember. There was something I was supposed to do, but I couldn't remember that either. It was like parts of my mind had gone missing. That feeling was wholly unsettling, and I went home with an uneasiness that didn't go away. A growing sense that I was forgetting something really important began to gnaw at me. I thought about it, going round and round in circles in my mind, and then it came to me. I was supposed to be killing Uncle Bob. He'd gotten to me when he confronted me at the concession stand. He wiped out part of my memory, or at least he tried to. But I had gotten to him as well. Bolting out of the house, I rode my bike back towards the water park as fast as I could. I checked the time on my phone as I pedaled down the street and saw I was running late, but if I hurried, I could still get there in time. Clementine was waiting for me in the sewer tunnels. Her face was shadowed in the darkness, and I could barely make out her half-mangled features. "You're late." "I know, sorry." She didn't say anything more, so I didn't explain. Just followed after her as she began to march down the tunnel. I quickly realized we were not going to the location she had told me about was the target. She was taking me somewhere else. The storage room where Uncle Bob kept our life contracts was on the other side of the park, and Bob would be guarding it closely since I confessed it was our target. But it wasn't. You know, even after this is done, even if this all works out, things will never be like they were between us. You know that, right? Her words shocked me. I hadn't even considered it. I just assumed that when this was over, things would be normal again. That everything would go back to how it was when we first met. Why not? Why can't things go back to the way they were? I miss you. She spun around, and even in the darkness, I saw tears in her eyes as she spoke. "Because you can't look at me. Look at my face." Her half-dead, half-human face was split straight down the middle. Shadows obscuring most of the worst details, but I could still see the necrotic flesh on one side, puckering and gray with worms and millipedes crawling in and out of the eye socket. "It's never going to be the same. Now, let's just get this over with. I just can't talk about it right now. It's hard enough as it is." She began to walk again, and from behind, I saw half her hair was still orange, while the other side was now mostly bald. Dead scalps falling out in clumps with her movements. Finally, we reached a ladder which took us down one more level. It was dark down there, and I could barely see. The rest of them should be setting fire to the park as we speak. By the time we get back up there, this place will be nothing but cinders. But that won't kill Uncle Bob. He'll just rebuild, using us as labor like he did last time. Clementine's voice was quiet, and I followed her along the narrow passageway. "Right, but you said that you had a plan. Do you have a plan? You do have a plan, don't you?" She had said during our planning that my contract with Uncle Bob had left me susceptible, but that she couldn't tell me the specifics. It hadn't occurred to me until now, hearing the hesitation in her voice, that she didn't want to tell me what she was going to do. "Where are you taking me?" Clementine let out a long sigh and rested her hand on the door that we had come to in the darkness. "This wasn't going to be easy, I knew that. But I had no idea just how difficult it would be." "What isn't going to be easy, Clem? Show him! Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!" It was her other side. The dead one was speaking. It had a different voice, hoarse and harsh, laced with malice. "You're gonna have to show him eventually. Get it over with. Why else did you come down here? When else, if not now? Why can't you just shut up?" She pushed the door open, and it revealed a dim blue light within. Clementine entered, and I followed after her, unable to resist my curiosity, despite a growing unease, a worry which had crept into my guts, leaving a cinder block of dread there. I walked in behind her and found the room was filled with a huge aquarium. It took up most of the enormous underground room. A gigantic creature filled most of the tank. The thing looked like a large, flesh-colored octopus covered in purple, spotty patterns. It had many eyes which were all closed as if it was sleeping, breathing in and out regularly. There were hoses and wires hooked up to equipment on the other side of the room which looked complex and advanced, far beyond anything known on Earth. "What the hell is this?" I whispered, terrified of the thing waking up. Clementine walked up to the tank and laid her hand on the glass gently. Then she turned around and looked me dead in the eye. "Say hello to the real Uncle Bob." It turned out that Clementine did have a plan. Not an altruistic or good plan, but a plan nonetheless. What do you mean? The real Uncle Bob? I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was the largest octopus I'd ever laid eyes on, being held aquatic prisoner under the park. But Clementine was claiming that this was actually the devil who had caused all of our woes. There's something I need to tell you about me. Something I was scared to tell you before. I'm still scared. But you're going to find out soon enough. What are you talking about? What the hell is going on, Clementine? I wanted to tell you sooner. I just wasn't sure how you would react. Tell him! The decaying side of her face was screaming again. I am! Jordan, How do I say this? Uncle Bob? He's my dad. My jaw dropped, and I stared at her in shock. I backed away, suddenly terrified to be near her. She looked up and appeared crestfallen. She had the same look as when I saw her mutilated face after the accident. I told you he wouldn't understand, said the dead side of her. She ripped one of the tubes from the side of the tank and water began to spray on the floor, gushing from the opening like a fire hose. Alarms began to sound from the machinery in the corner. Clementine pulled an electrical cord, then another and another. Her face was a blank mask, emotionless. Sparks flew, and with all the water on the ground, I was scared of being electrocuted. Backing away from her, I saw the look on her face of betrayal and spurned hope. My hand found the door behind me, and I pushed it open just as the eyes of the massive octopus popped open, and it began to thrash about in its glass cage. I ran out of the room. I fled from there, down the dank basement tunnels, and up the ladder, and out of there as quickly as I could. When I got to the surface, popping up from a sewer grate and sticking my hand out like an escaped convict, I saw the water park was on fire in the distance. My heart was pounding, I was sweating from my escape. My mind tried desperately to make sense of what I had just seen. The only conclusion I could come up with was that she had just committed patricide. Clementine said Uncle Bob was her father, but that strange psychic octopus alien creature was likely not capable of giving birth to a human child. My guess was that it had been telepathically controlling a human host. The one we knew as Uncle Bob, and that Uncle Bob had found a woman to partner with at some point who had given birth to Clementine. But really, I didn't know for sure. Another part of my mind pictured the spider creatures from Alien that latched onto people's faces and then implanted their young down the throat of unsuspecting victims. And for all I knew, Clementine had a little octopus creature living inside her, pulling her gears and operating her like a piece of machinery. But that was unlikely. And all these thoughts ran through my mind as I ran from the water park, as fast as my legs could carry me. And at some point I heard a loud, shrill, ear-splitting scream from behind me, where I'd come from. It cut through the air like a knife in the darkness, and it pierced my ears. They ached for days, and I still hear a faint ringing, non-stop. But the good thing was, I felt him let go. I felt Uncle Bob's grasp on me disappear. It was gone. She was gone. I was sure of it. There was no way she could have survived. A few days passed, and the fire was all anyone in town was talking about. Everyone said it was sad the owner had passed away. Even though he was a controversial character, Uncle Bob was a fixture around town, and his supposed love of children was well known. A local reporter began to ask around town and came to talk to me since I had worked there for so long. He wanted to know if the tales about the place were true, if it had been as wild at the water park as the stories said. I can't really talk about it, I told him. I'm still under contract. The words slipped out naturally, and I didn't realize I had even uttered them until later. I see, he said dubiously. Okay, one more question. Do you have any thoughts on the new owner? She's a bit young to be running an amusement park of that size, don't you think? That's the first I'm hearing about it. What's the new owner's name? I asked, already knowing the answer. Already knowing who my new boss was going to be. Clementine Sweeney, he said. Did you ever work with her over at the water park? I let out a little chuckle. Yeah, she saved my life once upon a time. The reporter raised his eyebrows, brought his pen up to the notepad once more, and settled in, looking curious. I got a story about that, actually. If you want to hear it. Hey there kids, it's me, Mr. Creepypasta, and thank you for watching tonight's video, or listening to tonight's podcast, and thank you for clicking the thumbs up, the subscribe, the follow, the bell, the whatever helpful thing there is on such a platform. If you want to find your nice Halloween horror audiobook to listen to this year, check out audible.com and look for Mr. Creepypasta, because I got a whole bunch of books over there. Books like Tales from the Gas Station. And as always, I want to give a very big thank you to everybody who is supporting me on Patreon. If you guys have been supporting me on Patreon, or if you're considering doing so, then know that I just added in a couple of cool things for the loyalty program because I found out that I could. I had no idea that I could do that. So now, you guys should be getting some cool things in the mail brought to you by Patreon that are pretty cool. They support the channel as well. Oh, getting to the point though, a huge thank you to patrons such as Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Brian Arce, Bobby Carmen, Stephanie Butler, Tristan Pelton, Chance Burnett, Diana Krause, William King, Heather McDonald, Reaper61167, Alex the Sandwich, Darth Miver, Michael Ortiz, Satanic Aries, Ness69420, Isoto Hatred with 2 exclamation points, Nessie, Ronnie Hansen, Bardohawk764, Melancholy Corpse, Ferb, Harley, Billy Morrow, Madam Skullbunny, Sashi Suzaku, Grizzly Olsen.pro, Caden the Spooky Boy, Zane Nightshade, My Body Sounds Like Rice Krispies, Ashwood, Lord of the Weebs, Jay, Miss Exandra, Mr. Unsettling Spaghetti, Suji Campbell, Stricken, Azarine Fox, Fried Chicken 12, Freddy Krueger, Pie Nanny, Michael Scarborough, Infernal One, Lisa Cottrell, Caspian, Jordan Nels, Hades' Nephew, Tater Chip, Acid System, Prozac and Pancake Appreciation Society, Cryptic Nightmares, Kiri the Sloth, Tommy Green, Fester's Lampshade, Sky Harbor, Nina Smith, Nico Cayo, Rafael Rodriguez, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Polson, Trace Miles, and Corey Kenshin. Thank you guys so much, so much for being a part of the Patreon and helping me keep the lights on and helping me get exclusive stories and everything that we do on the channel here. Thank you guys so much for being a part of it. Thank everybody in the description, and thank you guys who have stayed to this part of the video. It really means so much to me. I hope you all have a very happy Halloween, and sweet dreams.